Hey, what is up, everybody? Today we are going on Reddit to look at some posts about therapy, people's experiences with therapy, questions that they have, complaints that they have about their therapists, and just reacting to some of the stories that people are sharing. I can't believe I didn't think about this as a source of content earlier, but this is looking like this could be a regular source of content for us in the future. So definitely let me know below if this is something that you'd be interested in hearing more reactions to in terms of the different stories, what kinds of stories you'd be interested in. So as we get into it, please do like and subscribe. That helps the channel to grow. And let's dig into some of these stories. All right, so the first story is titled "Dropped by My Therapist Today." All right, so this is a vent/rant. The funny thing is, all week I've been trying to find the words to tell my therapist that I no longer want treatment from her because she often oversteps boundaries. Okay, red flag already. If you're noticing that your therapist is overstepping boundaries, especially that you're saying often, so that means there's repeated problems, that needs to be brought up already in the therapy sessions. And if they're brought up and these boundary oversteps continue, then you definitely need to consider whether having a different therapist who actually respects what you're saying is going to be something that's better for you in the long term. Even if you think they're maybe very uniquely equipped to be able to help you, if they can't respect your basic boundaries, that means there's going to be a lot more problems in the future, regardless of how skilled they are. In the past, she's come into my appointments literally crying about something that has happened in her life, and I'm put in the awkward position to comfort her. Yeah, that's definitely a problem. You should never be in a place where you feel like you are providing something to the therapist outside of providing the payment for services, of course. I mean, that's just the normal part of that counseling relationship. But you shouldn't be providing emotional support for your counselor or therapist, whoever your mental health professional is. And as a professional, it is on her to be able to own that, be professional in their space and their time with you, and be able to deal with their personal stuff outside of that, or to communicate with you, at least giving informed consent. Hey, I just got this bad news. I may not be all that together today. I am willing to reschedule, or if you feel like you really need the session, I just want to own that up front. At least having the open conversation about it, if not being able to completely compartmentalize. Last week was the last straw. She's known for years that I am not and have never been a Trump supporter. Oh, okay, it's getting good already. Politics came up and she started defending Trump and Musk and told me I needed to find news sources that are unbiased. The appointment ended on a very sour note, as most of those conversations tend to do. So again, we're talking about a boundary overstep. Whether or not, this client brought up politics, it is not on the therapist to tell the client what they need to believe, what news sources they need to look at. And so as soon as the therapist started getting involved personally with her own beliefs and her own assumptions, that's when the therapy session went off the rails. And this is no longer therapeutic, but this is a debate. This is a political conversation that is neither helpful for the client nor appropriate for what they should be paying for. So this morning, before I could even message her to cancel all my appointments, she texted me saying she's no longer in my network and that we need to hold off on appointments until it's worked out. That is some suspicious timing. I logged into the portal and saw that all my appointments were already canceled. Okay, that's another red flag, not having any kind of exit plan, especially if you're talking about being out of network with somebody's insurance. That's not something that happens overnight, unless it was something from the insurance side. And even then, they tend to give you heads up because it's all about continuity of care. It's irresponsible for me to just drop somebody and say, hey, you're on your own now without some kind of prior conversation. Hey, I'm transitioning away from taking your insurance. Let me make sure that I find somebody that's in your network, or be able to do a warm handoff, some kind of referral. Let me have a conversation with your permission with your next provider so that they know what we've been working on, what's been working, what hasn't worked. And it seems like none of that has happened. Now, I do admit this is getting from the client's perspective, but there needs to be more warning than that. This stuff does not happen overnight, and this is a very irresponsible way to end a counseling relationship. The portal shows she's still in network and even gives me the option to make an appointment with her. Okay, so we have dishonesty, which is also a problem. And then also, yeah, this is just completely on the therapist's side. There is no consent. There's no informed consent here in terms of having a conversation with the client. Like, hey, that was a tough conversation. Maybe I overstepped with what I was trying to say or what I was trying to communicate. Do you want to continue this relationship and work through it? Or would you like to see somebody else because we have these very opposing political views and I can't seem to keep myself out of it? That needs to be something that the therapist owns, in their conversation, and there needs to be communication about that. Again, this is about the therapist as a professional, not just that, oh, it has to be on the therapist to fix things, but because she is the professional in the room, she has to be the one that acts professionally. Okay, Kitty wants to be in the video, so let me get him up real quick. Come up here. Oh, yeah, you like all the drama. Okay, so the person says, I want to text her back and call her out on her lies, but I'm not even going to respond. I'm moving on and looking for a better therapist. Good for you. Okay, this is not something that you need to resolve. And I think this would be worth maybe a report to your local state board. And I think none of these things are blatantly unethical in the sense that she would immediately be disciplined, but there are definitely concerns that enough of these reports crop up that, hey, this person is getting too politically and personally involved with her clients, or that she is lying about her status with insurance networks. Those are definitely problems that the board needs to be aware of. And even if it doesn't lead to action right away, with future reports, there's at least documentation that, hey, this is a long-standing problem that she is not taking care of. So I'm glad that this person is looking for somebody new, and I hope that nobody else runs into the similar problems with this therapist. All right, let's look at this next one. I need therapy, but I really don't have the money. Okay, yeah, we've talked about stuff like this before. Let's see. I'm feeling really helpless, stuck in these patterns and thoughts. I feel suffocated. I really don't know what to do, I guess, with all these piercing emotions. I want to find solutions, find better mechanisms, and really need this all sorted out, but I can't. I barely have savings that can afford one session. Please tell me how to deal with all this, please. Yeah, absolutely difficult situation, especially what's going on in the US here with potentially Medicaid and Medicare and insurance companies and all of this stuff. That's all up in the air. So I can get that people have a lot of anxiety about their healthcare situations, and especially for this person where they're saying they don't have the savings, they don't have the cash to be able to pay for a therapist. What I would say is look in local universities. Maybe they have interns or residents who might be able to see people for free, or just local practices around your area who have interns who won't be able to charge for their services. Maybe look at community support groups, things like NAMI, that hold weekly meetings for people who are struggling with certain mental health disorders, and they categorize those groups differently to at least get some kind of support and community going for you. Also, nonprofits in the area might be a good place to start. There are community services boards, at least that's what they're called in Virginia, but you have public mental health agencies that most states, I think, have legislation that every region needs to have some kind of accessible mental health care. Now, the level of care that you might be able to receive might differ based on funding and the availability of resources, but that would definitely be a place to start, kind of like your regional community services board. Again, that's what they're called in Virginia, but your community mental health agency, which are established to be able to serve everyone in the community regardless of their ability to pay. And now this person is describing something that feels and sounds a little more serious, but you might look at workbooks potentially for something that might be milder in terms of buying maybe a CBT book, working through some of those skills, some of those worksheets, and you might be able to get some benefit from that if you're really that strapped for cash and you don't have access to some of those low income or free resources in the community for in-person counseling with somebody or support groups with a group of people. But yeah, absolutely, this is a tough situation to be in, and it might even be worth inquiring at local clinical practices about them taking pro bono clients. That's less dependable because it just depends on each clinician being willing and able to open up a free spot. But I hope some of those options are helpful for anybody who is looking for services but don't feel like they have the means to pay for traditional therapeutic interventions. All right, let's look at this one. It's so hard knowing that my therapist just had a baby. Vent/rant, okay? I'm about to turn 18, female, and my therapist just recently got back from maternity leave, okay? I don't know where this is going. And the idea of what she's going through right now are gut-wrenching, i.e. taking care of it. I assume the baby, breastfeeding, / if she's pumping during work, etc. I'm sorry, I know those are really invasive thoughts. Okay, first of all, you can't help where your thoughts go, but I'm curious what direction this is going. I just hate it horribly. I keep seeing reels about infants and new mothers like a cruel joke. I'm just struggling so much with this and I'm super embarrassed and there's no way I could ever bring it up to her. I try to act as unattached and professional as possible. Okay, so there's something going on here. Something really bothers this client that their therapist is a mother now, and something in the algorithm, of course, seems to have picked that up because, of course, it has. And I'm curious what they're trying to say and trying to act as unattached and professional as possible. Again, this is not on the client to act as professional as possible. As far as I can tell, there's no boundary crossings in terms of like the therapist bringing the baby to work or pumping in front of her or anything like that. So I'm not quite sure what this professionalism is about. Okay, there's an edit here. This is hard for me in the sense that I'm jealous of her being a mother to someone else. Okay. And having thoughts about how good of a mother she is. Okay, so we're dealing with issues of transference here, where you are seeing your therapist in light of your previous experiences. And so my guess would be that this client did not have a great childhood or feels like their mother figure was lacking somehow, and now seeing that this therapist, who maybe they saw as a mother figure, that as soon as she actually became a mother, that some of those feelings of jealousy came in and really clarified, oh wow, I'm seeing my therapist in this way, and that is not sitting well with her. That someone else got her as a mom and I didn't, and I grieve that, okay? I feel so sad about the cards I was dealt and how I'll never have a maternal figure like that. So the short answer is you need to bring that up in therapy. This is absolutely going to affect the therapeutic relationship. She is already changing how she presents in session because of this, and that's not going to help the process if she continues hiding that away and pretending like it'll go away if she just doesn't talk about it. It's gonna be embarrassing, I'm sure. It's gonna be awkward and a difficult conversation. But again, if you are trusting your therapist to have that unconditional positive regard, then it is important to have that conversation, because if you have that kind of trust in your therapist, that is a hard thing to give up just because of some circumstance of she had a baby. That's completely out of your control. And when we're talking about transference too, that's also out of your control based on your experience, right? As a client saying that you never had a maternal figure like that, and now you've kind of attached to this therapist as a maternal figure, that's something that's important to delve into and to explore. But I will say, right, she can't help how she feels about that situation. And again, it's important to have that conversation. It's important for the therapist, however out of left field that might feel for the therapist hearing this, if and when she decides to have that conversation, to handle that professionally. Again, it needs to be on the professional to be professional about these things, to be able to sort through her own feelings about it as the therapist in a separate space, maybe with supervision or consultation with another provider, and then turn that back towards the client to say, okay, where do you think this came from? And providing some space to process that emotionally. The jealousy, the grief, there's a lot going in here that probably would inform the kind of work that they're doing together. What I'll also say too, when this client says how good of a mother she is, and that's speaking about the therapist, this is something that I have to remind my clients of sometimes. What you see of me in the counseling session is not me as a real person. And what I mean by that is that I try to be authentic. I try to be real in the counseling session, but at the end of the day, I'm also acting as a professional in my professional capacity. So me being a good therapist does not necessarily mean that I'm a good father. Now, I would hope that I am a good father, but there's no guarantee of that. I can be good at my job and not good in other roles in my life. And that could also be true for this therapist as well. I have very little information. I have no clue whether the therapist is a good mother or not. But just to be aware that our transference can lead to us viewing our counselors, our therapists, our mental health professionals in a much better light than maybe is actually warranted. And so that would be important for the client and the therapist to explore together as well. Are you putting me on a pedestal because you feel like I've done good work for you, and therefore I must be a good mother, and therefore some of these feelings are being informed by the idea of me being the saintly figure? So there's a lot to unpack here, and I do hope that this person is able and brave and has the courage to have that conversation with the therapist, and the therapist can be professional and hold that without it making things too weird. I mean, it's going to be weird no matter what. But then to also take that, whatever feelings that brings up for the therapist, to be able to take that into consultation, talk about it with another professional. So yeah, tricky situation for sure. But again, It's not like anybody set out to create this circumstance. It just happens sometimes, and we need to be able to handle that professionally. All right, let's get into this one. Is therapy a scam? I assume they mean, is therapy a scam? All right, let's dig into that. Obviously, I'm biased when it comes to this question. I've been in therapy for almost 2 months now. I almost feel like my therapist is a trigger for my illness. I feel like I'm not heard, and she's always trying to relate to my situations. Okay, that's interesting. I'll come back to that in a second. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. Everything we talk about is jumbled or chaotic. I mean chaotic like I can go from talking about being 10 to what I'm going through now. Does it work for you? Okay, so my initial thoughts are, this sounds like the sessions are very unstructured. Wherever the client feels like going in their conversation, the therapist just follows, and it doesn't feel like there's a lot of structure or leadership within the sessions. And that could be helpful for the client to be able to verbalize to the therapist to say, hey, I feel like we're just going wherever my mind happens to go, and I would benefit from more structure or feeling like there's a purpose to where we're going and why we're talking about those things. That is an absolutely actionable item that the therapist should be able to take into consideration and be able to adjust what they're doing based on that. When this poster says that the therapist is always trying to relate to their situations, I think where this is going wrong is that this is not necessarily empathy, because what I get the impression is that the therapist is trying to relate. Oh, you know, there was one time I felt like this too. Oh yeah, this is kind of like when I did this, or I felt that way. And what that does when we do that is that it inserts us into the story, and it becomes about my experience as a professional, what I did, what I felt about a somewhat similar situation, and it doesn't center back to the client. It doesn't reflect back to them. How are they feeling? What would they like to do? What are their values in this story, in this situation? And so while it may be well-intentioned, it ends up putting the focus on the therapist instead of on the client. And I feel like that's probably where things are going wrong in terms of relating to the situation. And of course, this person doesn't say what their diagnosis or illness is, so it's hard to say. But if they've had problems with interpersonal relationships in the past where they felt kind of sidelined or somebody's not listening to them authentically, this could absolutely be a trigger for whatever feelings they might have as a result of that. And depending on how frequently they're going, if it's once a week or once every 2 weeks, going to therapy for almost 2 months, that's enough time to get a pretty good read on the direction your therapy is going, whether or not that relationship is working for you, and whether it'd be worth continuing. I think based on some of the conversations and some of the questions that I pointed out earlier, maybe pointing out and providing feedback to the therapist, if they can adjust what they're doing, this is not too far gone to the point where it's not productive at all or that there's no hope. I think it's salvageable, but again, this is where it's difficult that clients need to be able to give that feedback to the therapist, and you have to remember that you are the customer if you want to put it in purely transactional terms. You are paying for a service, and so the service needs to provide what you are looking for. And then the therapist needs to be able to handle that appropriately and not take it as criticism of their style or their interventions, but that just what I'm providing is not fitting the need for the client right now. And I need to be able to take that professionally and be able to adjust within what I'm able to do. Now, if I have a client who says like, hey, I need you to do X tool and I don't have training in that, or I'm not competent in that, then it would be irresponsible of me to try to accommodate that. And I would tell them that and say, hey, look, I can't do this for you. I would love to if I could. Let me pass you on to my colleague who is trained in what you are looking for so that they can provide you the service that you need. If it's just a matter of communication, hey, I need you to lead these sessions more, I need you to be more structured, or I need you to step back with your stories a little bit, that is absolutely stuff that is within my control, that I can do something about and I should do something about. So all that to say, I hope that this person doesn't go away thinking that therapy is a scam, but that there are some feedback that they can provide to their therapist so that it can be more fruitful for them in the long term. So those are the Reddit stories that I am reacting to today. There is a lot of drama from this, and this is not just for the entertainment value. I'm hoping that as we go through some of these stories that I can pick out some of these themes about client communication, being professional in the environment as a therapist, and how we balance things like consent and confidentiality and transference within the therapy process, so that you can know what you should expect from your mental health professional, how you can advocate for yourself, and what kinds of responses you should be getting to that kind of feedback. So again, this is about education, and I do appreciate these people sharing their stories in a public space to get feedback and also to highlight the difficulties that they're having with the therapy process. So thank you all so much for watching this video. Again, please do like and subscribe. Help us create more content like this to be able to educate, to help people advocate for themselves within the mental health space. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I'll see you all next time.